It began like any other warm evening in the worn concrete tower on Al-Azhar Street, a place where laundry lines crossed courtyards and the growl of generators bled into the call to prayer. The elevator, a narrow metal box lined with scuffed mirrors, had been the building's fragile promise of dignity. It groaned up 13 floors each day, carrying schoolchildren with backpacks too big for their shoulders, grandmothers with bread balanced on their palms, fathers who came home late and carried sleep in their eyes. The posted placard, 8 persons, 500 kilograms, had faded to a ghost of numbers. People joked that the only inspection it received was the one you did with your ears. Listen for the rattle, feel for the lurch and hope. On that night in 2022, the elevator arrived at the ground floor already crowded. A stroller folded awkwardly against knees, a box of mangoes, a bag of tools. 2 cousins squeezed in after arguing about football, promising they would only ride up to the 5th and hop out. Someone pressed 7, 11, 12, 13, lit beads of orange climbing in a jittery column. The metal cage lurched once, recovered, and clanked higher. Inside, the air smelled like dust and detergent. A boy made faces into the mirror. His mother laughed and tapped his cheek for luck. The doors rattled shut on a wedge of hallway light. Between the 6th and 7th floors, the car shuddered hard enough to knock the box of mangoes sideways. Then came a sound like a guitar string tearing. Sharp, bright, wrong. The main hoist cable parted. Witnesses later said the silence after the snap was the loudest thing they had ever heard. For a heartbeat, the car hung weightless, as if considering mercy. Then gravity took its debt. The elevator fell. Properly maintained lifts have governors and safety jaws that bite the rails when speed surges. This one had those parts in name only. The governor was clogged with the grease of 10 winters. The safety shoes were polished smooth from misalignment. A secondary rope, frayed to hair, tried and failed to hold. The car plunged 13 stories through a tunnel of cinder block and plaster dust, scattering a confetti of paint chips and insects. People inside reached instinctively for one another. The boy's mother pulled him in tight. A father threw his arms wide as if he could stop air. The impact rang up the shaft and into the night like a struck bell. Doors on every landing buckled outward. Apartment lights popped off. The generator coughed and died. Neighbors flooded the stairs with cell phones for lanterns, shouting names into concrete. Someone pulled the fire alarm. Someone called an emergency number and got a busy tone. Someone kicked at a door until his heel bled. The smell that came up was hot oil, old dust, and the copper bite of blood. When civil defense crews arrived, they dragged hoses and crowbars through a darkness that felt like a throat. The pit was a crush of metal folded into new shapes, floor welded to wall, roof curled like paper, cables snarled in black vine. They broke the landing sill with hammers, then chipped concrete by hand. Time in disasters is elastic. Seconds draw long as wire, minutes vanish. One by one they reached the car. They found a mother still cradling her son, his face pressed into the hollow of her shoulder. They found a man whose hands were locked around a stranger's waist, an anchor instinct had thrown in the final instant. 7 were gone before anyone could lift them. Others were carried out on doors and blankets, their eyes shocked wide, mouths working for words that would not come. The building's caretaker told the police that the residents ignored the posted limit, that he had warned them. He produced a folder of reports, stamped and signed. The signatures belonged to an inspector who had retired years earlier, and, as one officer quietly noted, had since been buried. The documents were forgeries, duplicates printed on paper the same color as yesterday's bread. Neighbors said they watched envelopes pass at the district office whenever the elevator failed an audit. The owner's nephew, who handled arrangements, said maintenance had been performed on schedule. No one could find the mechanic who supposedly did the work. Cairo knows these patterns the way it knows summer heat. In the capital and far beyond, lifts run on scavenged parts, rails are shimmed with scrap, brake pads are filed thin and blessed with a prayer, and techs are paid to keep things moving until payday. Complaints vanish, paperwork blooms and withers like desert grass. Years earlier, a coastal city saw a 14-story fall. In Alexandria, a cage smashed like a can dropped from a window. The news burned bright for 3 days and cooled. Statements were made, promises printed, banners hung. The ink outlived the reforms. Funerals began at first light. Coffins moved through alleys too narrow for cars, resting on shoulders that had carried furniture and water jugs and the weight of everything. At the graves, fathers shook while trying to hold steady. A boy placed a toy taxi on his cousin's coffin and refused to leave until his grandfather promised to keep it washed and shining. The imam's sermon spoke of patience, of justice that belongs to God alone. Afterward, on plastic chairs in a shaded courtyard, women counted the costs that would never be repaid. School uniforms folded forever, a kitchen gone too quiet, an empty place by the window at dusk. Inside the building, silence settled for a day, a fragile truce with whatever lived in the shaft. Then life returned by necessity. Children still needed to reach school, groceries still had to climb. Elderly neighbors leaned on rails and began the long spiral of steps, 10 breaths at every landing. Someone taped flowers to the bricked-up doors. The caretaker took the note down after an hour. An investigation opened and, as always, found what it was calibrated to find. A mechanic was fined. A clerk was moved to a new desk. The owner's company was ordered to replace the lift in due course. City officials stood for cameras beside a new sign that listed hotline numbers and penalties in bold red. For a week, the phones rang. Inspectors visited buildings in crisp shirts, clipboards angled for display. Calls returned to ringtones and recorded menus. The sign curled at the corners. What failed that night was not only a hoist rope or a governor's shoe. It was a chain that should have run from a tenant's complaint to a dispatcher's log to an inspector's boots, to a contractor's invoice to a real, finished repair. Instead, the chain ran in a loop, from a worried mother to a clerk's shrug, to an owner's grin to an envelope moving like a fish under paper, and back to the mother, still standing on the landing with groceries cooling against her shins, pressing the call button because what else was there to do? Systems are not only machines. They are habits, incentives, fears, and the little fictions adults tell to get through the day. The hole at the bottom of the shaft was filled with rubble and a skin of quick-set cement. A mason scratched a small cartouche in the corner with his trowel, a candle with a crooked flame. In the evenings, when the stairs pulsed with footsteps and chatter, some swore they could still feel a tremor in the concrete, as if the building flinched whenever someone leaned against the wall where the doors used to be. On the 12th floor, a grandmother watered basil in a chipped bowl and whispered to the absent, asking them to watch the stairs. She had walked those flights every day since the funeral. Her knees hurt, but the ache felt like penance she could pay in small coins. Cairo will build more towers. Cables will be threaded, motors bolted down, buttons installed. Inspectors will come with clipboards. Some will do their jobs with stubborn honor, others will not. Tenants will crowd in anyway because rent is high, because legs are tired. And somewhere, on some night that arrives with the sound of sandals and keys and neighborhood laughter, a car will lurch, a cable will sing its thin, terrible note, and a city will hold its breath and listen for the bell at the bottom of the shaft. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.